During an interview with Scientific American in 1920, Thomas Edison brought up the possibility of creating a device that would facilitate communication between the deceased and the living. In 2002, Dr. Carl Meiselhoff and his assistant Louis Mastenbroek conducted an experiment using the Edison spectrograph, a field receptor, which exposed a human volunteer to electromagnetic fields and visual stimuli. Before activating the device, Meiselhoff instructs the volunteer, Craig Leham, to ensure he is not carrying any metallic objects. During the experiment, Meiselhoff observed that Craig was the 31st human volunteer and that he had recently lost his younger sister, Jenny. Shortly after turning on the machine, Craig notices the sound of sirens and banging. He begins to feel as though there is someone else in the room. A phone connected to a device starts ringing, and Meiselhoff asks Craig to answer the call. Upon recognizing a familiar voice on the other end of the line, Craig confesses to the child that the tragedy was caused by him. His agitation increases as the child starts screaming at him. Mastenbroek alerts Meiselhoff to Craig's seizures. However, Meiselhoff decides to keep the machine running for a few more seconds. Suddenly, Craig vomits and lets out a scream of agony as his eyes explode. After 10 years, a priest consoles a saddened assembly during a funeral by discussing life after death. Meanwhile, Braden recalls a patient who reported seeing her deceased children while being operated on by doctors. When sharing this story with his colleagues, Bob suggests that the patient was experiencing hallucinations due to the use of ketamine, a substance that can induce near-death-like experiences. He mentions that a professor used this substance on graduate students as part of an experiment, but institutional review boards halted his laboratory activities on it. Devin, another anesthetist, invites Braden to dinner and asks him to bring his girlfriend named Abby. When Braden talks to Abby about the dinner, she doesn't want to participate because the occasion is a celebration of her pregnancy. However, Braden manages to convince her to go during dinner. Abby accidentally lets slip that she's pregnant by refusing an alcoholic drink. While Abby steps away to use the restroom, she suddenly starts experiencing abdominal pains and notices bleeding. Meanwhile, Braden shows an engagement ring to his colleagues and shares his plans to propose to Abby soon. Devin's wife, Donna, enters the bathroom shortly after and finds Abby unconscious and bleeding on the floor, so they immediately take her to the hospital. After Abby wakes up, she asks about the baby, but Braden chooses not to mention that she suffered a miscarriage. However, upon overhearing Braden talking to Devin, Abby is surprised by what she learns and decides to flee the hospital. As soon as Braden realizes Abby's absence, he sets out to search for her throughout the city. He calls Abby and apologizes for not revealing what really happened. Abby carries the weight of guilt for the abortion, but Braden reminds her that she shouldn't blame herself for something beyond her control. Then Abby tells Braden where she is. Braden almost hits her while observing traffic signs, but Abby seems fine. As Abby tries to open the passenger side door, another vehicle hits her and flees. Abby tells Braden she can hear sirens. Braden tries to keep her conscious by showing her the engagement ring and putting it on her finger. Abby sees bright wires and orbs and comments to Braden, "It's very beautiful there." Braden performs CPR on Abby, but she passes away before paramedics arrive. Braden is struggling to cope with Abby's loss, so he decides to search the internet for information about near-death experiences. He contacts Bob during the night to ask about the professor who used ketamine in his experiments. Bob reveals that it's physicist Dr. Carl Meiselhoff. While researching Meiselhoff online, Braden finds an old video of an interview where he participated as a guest on a program called True Science. During the interview, Meiselhoff says that people can have perceptions of the quantum universe at the moment of death. He mentions that by combining sound and substances like ketamine, it's possible to simulate the moment of death in the brain. Braden manages to locate Meiselhoff's address. However, Meiselhoff's wife, Margaret, informs him that he has already passed away. Braden reveals that he recently lost his fiancée, which makes Margaret feel compassion for him, and she invites him for coffee. During the conversation, Braden mentions the device Edison built in an attempt to communicate with the deceased. Margaret confirms the device's existence, but warns him about the terrible consequences of its use. Braden remains determined to bring Abby back no matter the cost, so Margaret agrees to let him take the machine while Braden sets up the device at his home. Mastenbroek uses another device to track a signal. When Braden uses the machine on himself, he is immediately struck by an epileptic seizure. Shortly after, Mastenbroek detects the signal emitted by Meiselhoff's machine and heads to Braden's apartment. Braden briefly spots a girl in the room. He faints when Mastenbroek arrives and turns off the device upon regaining consciousness. Braden hears Mastenbroek telling him, It's very beautiful there. Mastenbrook says he's there because he received instructions from Meiselhoff. When Braden mentions that Meiselhoff is dead, Mastenbrook confirms that he took his own life. Meiselhoff was Mastenbrook's mentor, and both were part of a group of scientists called the God Model Project, whose aim is to understand the laws of the universe. When questioned by Braden about the origin of the phrase he uttered upon waking up, Mastenbrook mentions that they were the last words of Thomas Edison. While they are at dinner in a restaurant, Mastenbrook talks about his research focus on string theory, which proposes that the universe consists of tiny vibrating strings. Meiselhoff relates this idea to the M theory, which suggests the existence of the universe on a kind of membrane. To illustrate this theory, Mastenbrook uses an analogy with bread and jelly. He compares the bread to a membrane and the jelly represents everything in the universe. Mastenbrook emphasizes that the universe is stuck to the membrane and only gravitons have the ability to escape from it. These gravitons move to other parallel membranes when they manage to escape. He theorizes that there is an infinite number of membranes, each containing its own universe. Meiselhoff proposed that the electrical signals of the human brain could be transported by gravitons to another dimension. After death, next Mastenbrook claims to have the ability to locate and even resurrect people in the afterlife. He asks Braden to contact Craig to act as an intermediary and allow his equipment to interact with this alternate dimension. Braden finds Craig at a radio station. During the show, Craig's co-host, Pastor Dave, asks what the afterlife is like, to which Craig responds that it is a very beautiful place shortly after a woman calls into the show asking Craig to contact her deceased husband. After receiving the deceased's name from the woman, Craig establishes contact with him in another dimension. The wife scolds her husband for driving under the influence of alcohol. To calm his wife, the husband offers her a seashell and asks Craig to deliver it to her. However, the woman informs Craig that she doesn't want the seashell. She explains that her husband found it on the beach during their first date and that she buried it with him. Craig takes the shell out of her husband's hands. After the show, Braden approaches Craig in the restroom and asks for help continuing Meiselhoff's research. Craig agrees to help upon hearing Mastenbrook is involved. Upon arriving at Braden's apartment, Craig expresses his clear indignation with Mastenbrook for leaving him blind. Mastenbrook mentions having adjusted Edison's machine to enhance its precision, but Craig questions the effectiveness of this modification. Mastenbrook maintains the idea that they will soon understand the laws governing the universe thanks to Edison's machine. However, Craig asserts that the God model would never allow them to reach such understanding. When Braden asks Mastenbrook about the God model, the scientist explains that Einstein conceived this idea in response to a student's question about his belief in God. Mastenbrook says Einstein illustrated this by drawing a square on the board to symbolize all existing knowledge in the universe. He then drew a smaller square inside it to represent the knowledge accumulated by humanity up to that point. He then divided this inner square into 4 parts, each representing a distinct area of physics. The upper left segment symbolizes classical physics, while the upper right represents relativity. In the bottom left is quantum physics, while in the bottom right is quantum relativity. Mastenbrook emphasizes that the inner square expands towards the outer square with each new discovery, thus broadening the boundaries of human knowledge. Einstein was convinced that the box would never be filled, as that would pave the way for humans to attain absolute knowledge and become equal to God. Later, Braden warns Craig about Mastenbrook's plans to subject him to the machine. However, Craig remains unfazed, as he has nothing left to lose and understands that life never extinguishes, only transforms. Craig then suggests that he is volunteering to reunite with his sister, who died in an accident while playing with his gun. Craig becomes emotional as he shares with Braden that his mother never forgave him. Braden encourages him to express his emotions, but Craig realizes he cannot cry. He then removes his sunglasses, revealing that he has no eyes. When checking Mastenbrook, Braden discovers that he is connecting another device to Edison's device. Mastenbrook explains that it is a quantum computer, capable of solving mathematical equations exponentially faster than conventional computers. He assures Braden that this will enable them to contact Abby without interference and track her location. Then, Mastenbrook puts Craig in a closet and connects him to the device. Moments after turning on the machine, the phone starts ringing, prompting Braden to answer it. Hearing Abby's voice asking why she was brought there, Braden struggles to understand her question, while the friction wax used by Abby in her art melts into a bucket. Abby confesses her love to Braden before the connection is interrupted. When they go to see Craig, they discover that he is having a seizure. Craig reports seeing snow and concludes that it was snowing when Abby died. He then argues that the membranes of the afterlife and the world of the living share the same space. Shortly after, Mastenbrook explains to Braden that Craig couldn't tolerate the frequencies emitted by the machine, and the only way to make it operate was to cause seizures at a level that would severely damage someone's brain. Braden concludes that they can achieve the same effect by introducing an anesthetic to control seizures and allow the subject to emerge from anesthesia when contacting the beyond, aiming to communicate directly with Abby. So Braden seeks out Devon to persuade him to administer the anesthetic. Braden presents a recording of the session and the melted wax as evidence to Devon that he has made contact with Abby, but Devon remains suspicious. Devon shares that he conducted an investigation into Mastenbrook and discovered he is a suspect in the Meiselhoff death case. However, Mastenbrook was not convicted due to lack of a body. Braden leaves without convincing Devon after being urgently called to the hospital. As Devon exits, Donna shows interest in the melted wax, imagining it to be an artistic mold. She decides to pour plaster to investigate its content. After melting the wax, she makes the surprising discovery that it is a mold of Abby's hand with the engagement ring. When Braden confronts Mastenbrook about Meiselhoff's death, he admits that Meiselhoff took his own life, but he also denies being responsible for his death. Craig interrupts the conversation to inform Braden that Meiselhoff isn't dead, though not alive either. Mastenbrook clarifies that Meiselhoff was attempting to fix the problem he himself created, as Craig's sister remains trapped between membranes after his experiment. Soon after, Devon arrives with a mold of Abby's hand and some hospital equipment. Braden becomes confused upon noticing two replicas of the engagement ring. Mastenbrook explains that, according to quantum physics, two objects can occupy different spaces simultaneously. He speculates that human beliefs or biases determine the membrane where people go after death, whether it's heaven, hell, or nirvana. Shortly after, Devon takes Braden to a closet and administers anesthesia so he can communicate with Abby. When Mastenbrook activates the device, Braden screams in pain, prompting Craig to ask him to shut it off. However, Mastenbrook informs them that the machine needs to remain operational for another 6 seconds. Suddenly, Braden vanishes from the chair. Then, he finds himself in a space between membranes. He observes a person wearing a device on their head similar to the one connected to Edison's machine, but the individual disappears a few seconds later. When Mastenbrook opens the closet, instead of finding Braden, Meiselhoff is inside. After Braden removes the device from his head, he finds himself inside the closet, but there's no sign of anyone else. He tries to exit the closet, but upon crossing the door, he returns inside. Then, he spots a young woman in front of Mastenbrook's diagram on the floor. Braden concludes that the girl is probably Jenny. Mastenbrook maintains the idea that Braden is trapped between membranes, replacing Meiselhoff. He states that it's impossible to bring Braden back without exchanging him for someone else, but Meiselhoff argues that there is a solution to this. Craig agrees, and details that they can retrieve Braden by joining the two membranes and then separating them. Meanwhile, in a parallel dimension, Braden attempts to come out of the closet again, but Jenny informs him that he cannot do so until the process has begun. Mastenbrook then restarts the machine to rescue Braden after connecting Craig to it. When the phone rings in the alternate dimension, Braden can come out and answer the call. Although he hears Craig's voice, he drops the device after Mastenbrook adjusts the machine's frequency. Bright beams of light akin to smoke descend from the sky as the two realities intertwine. Shortly after, Abby's artworks appear before Braden. Next, Abby emerges in the form of a luminous sphere. Braden removes the engagement ring and proposes at the moment when Abby takes on her human form. With the ring on her finger, he kisses her and announces he will take her home. Not far away, Craig removes his sunglasses and realizes his vision has been restored. Then Jenny runs towards him and hugs him. Craig catches Braden's attention, saying hallelujah, before they are transported, along with Jenny, to a parallel universe by a sphere. A second sphere takes Braden and Abby to another reality. As the membranes separate, Mastenbrook cautiously observes the machine and witnesses a series of parallel universes aligning before an intense burst of light hits his eye. In a cemetery, Jenny applies wax to Abby's grave as part of her artistic expression. In an alternate universe, a pregnant Abby is seen relaxing in Braden's arms inside his art studio. During a special appearance on the True Science program, Mastenbrook, now with impaired vision in one eye, narrates his successful experience in sending individuals to parallel universes. When the M theory is mentioned by the host, Mastenbrook argues that it is no longer just a theory, as he himself witnessed the membranes with his own eyes and says, "They are very beautiful. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave a like to help the channel." Thank you for watching.